They say that man's fascination with the ocean runs deep. It should be no surprise. The ocean was with man before he discovered fire, and thus has long been symbolic of the unknowable. Even now, as we begin to discover all the creatures that people the sea's depths, so much remains hidden from us. Just out of man's sight is a hidden side of the ocean, a side that cannot be seen, no matter how deep his machines probe. If you wish, of course, you may see a glimpse of this side for yourself. Go to anywhere near the sea at spring tide. Gather as much seawater as you can, with any container that you can find. The size is dependent on how far you want to take this ritual. The bigger the container, the farther you go. Don't do this at any time other than spring tide, or the ritual won't work, and you'll be left feeling like an idiot. Water drawn by a full moon has a special potency, and you'd be surprised by the demand for it nowadays. Now you'll want to go to a shore between 12 and 3 AM. Be sure to bring something made of iron along with your container of seawater. Don't bring any electronics with you, not even a radio. That is, unless you want your gadgets to be smashed to bits. In the sand, draw a circle just large enough to encircle you and your container. Then close your eyes. Count to any number you wish. Most people use 5 or 10. And say something along the lines of, "I have some seawater to peddle." After a few minutes pass, figures will come up to you holding tankards. You must pour seawater into the tankards, or dole it out using whatever you have on hand. Make sure the iron isn't visible. Not good form to threaten the customers. You can look up, but don't make any facial expressions, no matter what you see. The souls of the drowned dead know they don't look as good as they used to, but that's no reason to deny them your seawater. Normally, the story would end here. For many it does. Doing that in itself is simple. To end the ritual, say something along the lines of, "My shop's closed, come back another time." Although some customers might be disappointed, they'll leave and never bother you again. Unless, of course, you want them to. By the way, if you run out of seawater, say so. Pretending otherwise will lead to very undesirable fate. Sea spirits don't like being fibbed to, and flat out lying to them is a great way to invite all sorts of trouble. Some of them will get rowdy, and will drag you back home to have a stern word with you. Their home, of course, not yours. It does say a lot about this ritual that being drowned by angry sea zombies is the second worst thing that could happen, eh? The really brave, really unlucky, or just really stupid will want to continue this little adventure. To continue it past this point, you simply need to have enough seawater to last throughout the night. After you've passed a certain period of time, stranger things will start to happen. The iron in your pocket will start rattling like mad. When it does, keep your head down and do not look back up. You might think you're some kind of superhuman for looking into the eyes of the dead and not flinching, but your new patrons are in a completely different league. You'll know when your new customers are there, when you stop having rusted tankards shoved in your face. Some of them won't even bother with containers. Just pour and wait for the next customer, no matter how grotesque the sights you see are. These beings tolerate impoliteness a lot worse than your previous patrons, and you already know how those folks deal with rude merchants. Oh, and unlike last time, it is absolutely crucial that you not run out of seawater. Your customers are so terribly thirsty, and denying them service is the best way to get on their bad side. Whether you lie or not is irrelevant now. What they will do to you will make death by drowning look like a mercy. The lucky ones turn out washed up on the beach the next day, completely and irreversibly insane. Of course, the disappearances are far more common. And do not, under any circumstances, break the circle. The undead, at least, have the decency to respect your boundaries, and it's not dangerous at all to break the circle when they are the ones you're serving. These others aren't as polite. In fact, they are actively being kept from going in the circle by one of the oldest rules of the earth. If you want to end the ritual at this point, you'll have to wait until daybreak. Ending it at any time before will dissolve the magic of your circle and remove what little power there is protecting you. I don't need to tell you why that's a bad thing. At the first sign of dawn, no matter how much seawater you have left or how many customers are still in line, they will start slithering back into the ocean. Don't look up until the sounds come to a complete stop. Get out of the circle and get as far away from the sea as you can. I suggest staying away from shorelines and piers for the next week. I repeat, nothing dangerous will come to you unless you invite it in, but experiences like this tend to leave a mark on normal people. What you've experienced is a glimpse of things we were never made to fully comprehend, and be thankful for that. For if man was to gaze upon the things that you have had a brief glimpse of in their entirety, well, think about what could be while lying in bed, and don't mind the taste of seawater on your lips. I am writing this under appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think, from my slavery to morphine, that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realise, why it is that I must have forgetfulness, or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal indeed was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of the unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the land oppressed me with nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which for innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me, that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat, thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory for an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odour of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock, which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain. I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of great horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Though my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyse, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks, and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian depths where no light had yet penetrated. All at once my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with the sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude, and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship, and perhaps the worship, of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near its zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of Dore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, but the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously though, they seemed to have been chiselled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing, whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then I suddenly saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise from the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and the cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard peals of thunder, and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in San Francisco Hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked me up in my boat mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information, or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may, at this very moment, be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols, and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows, to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink, and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense, slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. One summer, I fell in love with the sea. It didn't end well. My cousin owned a cottage in Northern California. It was like something out of a storybook. A former inn, built in a Bavarian style, sitting about 100 yards from the water's edge. Retaining walls made of colourful, sea-worn stones. Lovely backshore, with verdant patches and big picturesque rocks, whose interesting shadows crept along the seascape. Acres of that pleasant smooth sand, the same colour as the wheat fields back home. And the sea. The endless sea. How could I even describe it? I wanted to stay by its side for as long as I lived. 3 days of strangeness changed my feelings. The sea is as alluring as ever, but it no longer welcomes me. It started with the neighbour's dog, that little loudmouth vermin, and the portly loudmouth curmudgeon who owned it, constituted the only unpleasant part of my blissful stay at the cottage. The thorns on the proverbial rose. I'd go get the paper, it would yap at me. I'd fill the bird feeders, it would yap at me. I'd weed the garden, it would yap at me. I'd go swimming, it would yap at me. I'd lie in bed listening to the gentle cadence of the waves, and it would yap at somebody else, but I'd still hear it. One morning, I found it on the cement steps leading down to the shore, tearing at the remains of some animal. I tried to shoo it away, and ended up swearing loudly and brandishing a chunk of driftwood when it wouldn't leave. The old man came out, and we got in a rather heated argument. It was some time before I was alone again, and remembered to throw the dead thing in the trash. The dog hadn't killed it. It didn't look like any animal had. It looked more like somebody butchered it, and left what they didn't want. I might not have thought much of it, if it weren't for the next day. I was sweeping sand off the same steps, and noticed a carcass lying on a flat rock a few feet away. This one was more disturbing, because I saw it before the animals could wreck it. It looked nice and orderly, in a horrifying sort of way. The animal had been carefully skinned and dissected. Some of the muscles and organs were cut cleanly away in a symmetrical fashion, and the rest was laid neatly on the ground. There was hardly any blood. I could have called the police, talked to some neighbours, or at least taken a picture of the weird sight, but my first instinct was to throw it away. It was only after I tied up the trash bag that I made an unpleasant connection. The old man had been calling for his dog all morning, and the mutilated body was just about its size and shape. I kept the discovery to myself. I would have looked pretty suspicious if I shared it. The carcasses weighed heavily on my mind for the rest of the day. Who does that sort of thing? What else do they do? I didn't have any answers that weren't scary. I remembered seeing something on TV about this happening to cattle. It made me uneasy. When night came, there was a pleasant stillness all around, but I couldn't relax. I couldn't forget why it was so quiet. The following evening, I came in from my last swim of the day and sat a while in the enclosed porch. I had a Glazunov record on the table, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon on the end table, and was watching the tangerine sun slowly sink into the wine-dark sea. The air and water were as calm as they get, and the landscape was beautiful. Something caught my eye. It was crawling over the smooth rocks amid the long shadows. It looked like a person, but didn't climb like one. He, she, or it seemed to be searching. Just as I was getting curious about what I was seeing, the sight was gone. I scanned the boulder-strewn shore for another glimpse, but to no avail. Soon after I gave up, I noticed something else, or the same thing in a different place. A woman was settled in the sand, letting the gentle waves wash over her body. Walking down and sitting next to her seemed like the natural thing to do. I'm not normally so bold around a strange woman, but I was enchanted by the moment, or buzzed from the wine. She was a dark-haired, pale-skinned beauty, the stuff of Rococo paintings. She was bare from at least the waist up. She seemed to have something on, but the waves and sand that enveloped her made it hard to tell. When she spoke to me, her voice was soft and sweet. Her accent was nothing I recognized. "The sea is beautiful tonight," she said. I concurred. "Were you looking for something?" I asked. She showed me. It was a knife. She replaced it in a pouch she had with her. It was a rusty olive colour, with little decorative tails and curly cords. It looked almost alive. It was full of implements, like blades, forceps and scales. I might have wondered about that, but when she leaned against me, I couldn't think about anything but her warm, soft body. I found myself eyeing her chest. I didn't mean to look, but there were a couple of things I couldn't miss. Long red gashes. "You're hurt?" "No," she said calmly. "Those are normal." She was right. I recognized what they were in a moment. A surprise, but it made sense. Just as I'd started to get the notion she'd gone swimming in a silver sequined skirt, it dawned on me I was seeing something entirely different down there. Again, a little buzz, no panic. I didn't even say a word, just continued relaxing in the sand. I was curious, to be sure, but I wasn't in the mood to analyse the situation. I put my arm around her, and we enjoyed the summer evening together. Mostly we sat in silence. I did ask a couple of questions before our encounter was over. "What brings you to land?" I asked. "Food," she said. "What kind of food?" "New kinds," she said. "Not very good." "Do you like the land?" "I like where it meets the sea." She gestured to the shimmering waves. How could I not love sights like this? The sunlight was slipping away, and before very long it came time for her to go. I asked if I could see her again. "I'd like that," she said. "Before you leave, may I see you? All of you?" I asked. She didn't answer for what seemed like ages. I was scared she was offended. I couldn't blame her if she was. Just as I was thinking how to word an apology, she slipped into the water to wash the sand off her body. All was revealed when she did a handstand in the shallows. This confirmed what I thought. She was quite the mammal up top, but an unmistakable fish at the bottom. There was some confusion in the middle, with peachy skin around the gills and scales around the navel. The things you expect to see on a woman stopped showing up after the waist. The silver scales glistened gold in the sunset. I could never possibly describe how beautiful the sight was. "Now you," she said, as she rested on the wet sand. "Now I what?" I asked, though I was pretty sure what she meant. Without negotiation, she seized my shirt and swiftly yanked it over my head. Not wasting an instant, she started pushing me into a standing position. The moment I obliged, she stuck her fingers into my waistband and pulled my trunks down. "So this is a landman," she cooed, as her eyes examined my body. Her cute expression of innocent curiosity made me smile. The fear and embarrassment that should have been at the forefront of my mind were over in a distant corner instead. Soon, her eyes fixed on something that made her nose wrinkle in disgust. Almost as soon as I was gone, running naked to the cottage as fast as my legs could carry me. I've never gone near the edge of the ocean since. Not after those final words the sea woman said to me. She said, "That will have to come off." It was a dark, starless night. We were becalmed in the northern Pacific. Our exact position I do not know, but the sun had been hidden during the course of a weary, breathless week by a thin haze which had seemed to float above us about the height of our mastheads, at whiles descending and shrouding the surrounding sea. With there being no wind, we had steadied the tiller, and I was the only man on deck. The crew, consisting of 2 men and a boy, was sleeping forward in their den, while Will, my friend, and the master of our little craft, was aft in his bunk on the port side of the little cabin. Suddenly, from the surrounding darkness, there came a hail. "Schooner! Ahoy!" The cry was so unexpected that I gave no immediate answer because of my surprise. It came again, a voice curiously throaty and inhuman, calling from somewhere upon the dark sea, away on our port broadside. "Schooner! Ahoy!" "Hello?" I sung out, having gathered my wits somewhat. "What are you? What do you want?" "You need not be afraid," answered the queer voice, having probably noticed some trace of confusion in my tone. I am only an old man." The pause sounded odd, but it was only afterward that it came back to me with any significance. "Why don't you come alongside then?" I queried somewhat snappishly, for I liked not his hinting at my having been a trifle shaken. I can't. It wouldn't be safe, The voice broke off, and there was silence. "What do you mean?" I asked, growing more and more astonished. "What's not safe? Where are you?" I listened for a moment, but there came no answer, and then a sudden indefinite suspicion of I knew not what coming to me, I stepped swiftly to the binnacle and took out the lighted lamp. At the same time I knocked on the deck with my heel to waken Will. Then I was back at the side, throwing the yellow funnel of light out into the silent immensity beyond our rail. As I did so, I heard a muffled cry, and then the sound of a splash, as though someone had dipped oars abruptly. Yet I cannot say with certainty that I saw anything, save it seemed to me that was the first flash of the light. There had been something upon the waters, where now there was nothing. "Hello there!" I called. "What foolery is this?" But there came only the indistinct sounds of a boat being pulled away into the night. When I heard Will's voice from the direction of the after scuttle. "What's up, George?" "Come here, Will," I said. "What is it?" he asked, coming across the deck. I told him the queer thing that had happened. He put several questions, then, after a moment's silence, he raised his hands to his lips and hailed, "Boat ahoy!" From a long distance away, there came back to us a faint reply, and my companion repeated his call. Presently, after a short period of silence, there grew on our hearing the muffled sound of oars, at which Will hailed again. This time there was a reply. "Put away the light." "I'm damned if I will," I muttered, but Will told me to do as the voice bade, and I shoved it down under the bulwarks. "Come nearer," he said, and the oar strokes continued. Then, when apparently some half-dozen fathoms distant, they ceased again. "Come alongside!" exclaimed Will. "There's nothing to be frightened of aboard here." "Promise that you will not show the light?" "What's to do with you," I burst out, "that you are so infernally afraid of light?" "Because," began the voice, and stopped short. "Because what?" I asked quickly. Will put his hand on my shoulder. "Shut up a minute, old friend," he said in a low voice. "Let me tackle him." He leaned more over the rail. "See here, mister," he said. "This is pretty queer business, you coming upon us like this, right in the middle of the blessed Pacific. How are we to know what sort of hanky-panky trick you're up to? You say there's only one of you. How are we to know unless we get a squint at you, eh? What's your objection to the light, anyway?" As he finished, I heard the noise of the oars again, and then the voice came, but now from a greater distance, and sounding extremely hopeless and pathetic. "I am sorry. I would not have troubled you, only I am hungry and so is she." The voice died away, and the sound of the oars, dipping irregularly, was borne to us. "Stop!" sang out Will. "I don't want to drive you away. Come back. We'll keep the light hidden if you don't like it." He turned to me. "It's a damn queer rig, this, but I think there's nothing to be afraid of." There was a question in his tone, and I replied, "No, I think the poor devil's been wrecked around here and gone crazy." The sound of the oars drew nearer. "Shove that lamp back in the binnacle," said Will. Then he leaned over the rail and listened. I replaced the lamp and came back to his side. The dipping of the oars ceased, some dozen yards distant. "Won't you come alongside now?" asked Will in an even voice. "I have had the lamp put back in the binnacle." I cannot," replied the voice. "I dare not come nearer. I dare not even pay you for the provisions." "That's all right," said Will, and hesitated. "You're welcome to as much grub as you can take." Again he hesitated. "You are very good," exclaimed the voice. "May God, who understands everything, reward you." It broke off huskily. The lady," said Will abruptly, "is she—" "I have left her behind upon the island," came the voice. "What island?" I cut in. "I know not its name," returned the voice. "I would to God—" it began, and checked itself as suddenly. "Could we not send a boat for her?" asked Will at this point. "No!" said the voice, with extraordinary emphasis. "My God, no!" There was a moment's pause. Then it added, in a tone which seemed a merited reproach. "It was because of our want that I ventured, because her agony tortured me." "I am a forgetful brute!" exclaimed Will. "Just wait a minute, whoever you are, and I will bring you up something at once." In a couple of minutes he was back again, and his arms were full of various edibles. He paused at the rail. "Can't you come alongside for them?" he asked. No, I dare not," replied the voice, and it seemed to me that in its tones I detected a note of stifled craving, as though the owner hushed a mortal desire. It came to me then in a flash that the poor old creature out there in the darkness was suffering for actual need for that which Will held in his arms, and yet, because of some unintelligible dread, refrained from dashing to the side of our schooner and retrieving it. And with the lightning-like conviction there came the knowledge that the invisible person was not mad, but sanely facing some intolerable horror. "Damn it, Will," I said, full of many feelings, over which predominated a vast sympathy. "Get a box, we must float off the stuff to him in it." This we did, propelling it away from the vessel, out into the darkness, by means of a boat hook. In a minute a slight cry from the invisible man came to us, and we knew that he had secured the box. A little later he called out a farewell to us, and so heartfelt a blessing that I am sure we were the better for it. Then, without more ado, we heard the ply of oars across the darkness. "Pretty soon off," remarked Will, with perhaps just a little sense of injury. "Wait," I replied. "I think somehow he'll come back. He must have been badly needing that food." "And the lady," said Will. For a moment he was silent. Then he continued. "It's the queerest thing I've ever tumbled across since I've been fishing." "Yes," I said, and fell to pondering. And so the time slipped away. An hour, another, and still Will stayed with me, for the queer adventure had knocked all desire for sleep out of him. The third hour was 3 parts through when we heard again the sound of oars across the silent ocean. "Listen," said Will, a note of excitement in his voice. "He's coming, just as I thought," I muttered. The dipping of the oars grew nearer, and I noted that the strokes were firmer and longer. The food had been needed. They came to a stop a little distance off the broadside, and the queer voice came again to us through the darkness. "Schooner ahoy!" "Is that you?" asked Will. "Yes," replied the voice. "I left you suddenly, but there was great need." "The lady?" questioned Will. "The lady is grateful now on earth. She will be more grateful soon in heaven." Will began to make some reply in a puzzled voice, but became confused and broke off short. I said nothing. I was wondering at the curious pauses, and apart from my wonder, I was full of a great sympathy. The voice continued. She and I have talked, as we shared the result of God's tenderness and yours." Will interposed, but without coherence. "I beg of you not to belittle your deed of Christian charity this night," said the voice. "Be sure that it has not escaped his notice." It stopped, and there was a full minute's silence. Then it came to us again. "We have spoken together upon that which
which has befallen us. We had thought to go out without telling anyone of the horror which has come into our lives. She is with me in believing that tonight's happenings are under a special ruling, and that it is God's wish that we should tell you all that we have suffered since...
Yes, said Will softly.
Since the sinking of the Albatross.
Ah, I exclaimed involuntarily. She left Newcastle for San Francisco some 6 months ago, and hasn't been heard of since.
Yes, answered the voice, but some few degrees north of the line, she was caught in a terrible storm and dismasted. When the day came, it was found that she was leaking badly, and presently, it falling to a calm, the sailors took the boats, leaving a young lady, my fiancée, and myself upon the wreck. We were below, gathering together few of our belongings when they left. They were entirely callous through fear, and when we came upon the decks, we saw them only as small shapes afar off upon the horizon. Yet we did not despair, but set to work and constructed a small raft. Upon this we put such few matters as it would hold, including a quantity of water and some ship's biscuit. Then, the vessel being very deep in the water, we got ourselves onto the raft and pushed off. It was late when I observed that we seemed to be in some of the way of some tide or current, which bore us from the ship at an angle, so that in the course of 3 hours, by my watch, her hull became invisible to our sight, her broken masts remaining in view for a somewhat longer period. Then, towards evening, it grew misty, and so through the night. The next day we were still encompassed by the mist, the weather remaining quiet. For 4 days we drifted through this strange haze, until, on the evening of the 4th day, there grew upon our ears the murmur of breakers at a distance. Gradually it became plainer, and, somewhat after midnight, it appeared to sound upon either hand at no very great space. The raft was raised upon a swell several times, and then we were in smooth water, and the noise of the breakers behind. When the morning came, we found that we were in a sort of great lagoon, but of this we noticed little at the time, for close to us, through the enshrouding mist, loomed the hull of a large sailing vessel. With one accord, we fell upon our knees and thanked God, for we thought that there was an end to our perils. We had much to learn. The raft drew near to the ship, and we shouted on them to take us aboard, but none answered. Presently the raft touched against the side of the vessel, and seeing a rope hanging downward, I seized it and began to climb. Yet I had much ado to make my way up, because of a kind of grey, lichenous fungus that had seized upon the rope, and which blotched the side of the ship lividly. I reached the rail and clambered over it onto the deck. Here I saw that the decks were covered in grey patches with grey masses, some of them rising into nodules several feet in height, but at the time I thought less of this matter than of the possibility of there being people aboard the ship. I shouted, but none answered. Then I went to the door below the poop deck. I opened it and peered in. There was a great smell of staleness, so that I knew in a moment that nothing living was within, and with the knowledge, I shut the door quickly, for I felt suddenly lonely. I went back to the side where I had scrambled up. My sweetheart was still sitting quietly upon the raft. Seeing me look down, she called up to know whether there were any aboard of the ship. I replied that the vessel had the appearance of having been long deserted, but that if she would wait a little, I would see whether there was anything in the shape of a ladder by which she could ascend to the deck. Then we would make a search through the vessel together. A little later, on the opposite side of the decks, I found a rope-side ladder. This I carried across, and a minute afterwards, she was beside me. Together we explored the cabins and apartments in the after part of the ship, but nowhere was there any sign of life. Here and there, within the cabins themselves, we came across odd patches of that queer fungus, but this, as my sweetheart said, could be cleansed away. In the end, having assured ourselves that the portion of the vessel was empty, we picked our ways to the bows, between the ugly grey nodules of that strange growth, and here we made a further search, which told us that there was indeed none aboard but ourselves. This being now beyond any doubt, we returned to the stern of the ship, and proceeded to make ourselves as comfortable as possible. Together we cleared out and cleaned 2 of the cabins, and after that I made examination whether there was anything eatable in the ship. This I soon found was so, and thanked God in my heart for his goodness. In addition to this, I discovered the whereabouts of the freshwater pump, and having fixed it, I found the water drinkable, though somewhat unpleasant to the taste. For several days we stayed aboard the ship, without attempting to get to the shore. We were busily engaged in making the place habitable. Yet even thus, early we became aware that our lot was even less to be desired than might have been imagined, for though, as a first step, we scraped away the odd patches of growth that studded the floors and walls of the cabins and saloon, yet they returned almost to their original size within the space of 24 hours, which not only discouraged us, but gave us a feeling of vague unease. Still, we would not admit ourselves beaten, so set to work afresh, and not only scraped away the fungus, but soaked the places where it had been with carbolic, a can, full of which I had found in the pantry. Yet by the end of the week, the growth had returned in full strength, and in addition, it had spread to other places, as though our touching it had allowed germs from it to travel elsewhere. On the 7th morning, my sweetheart woke to find a small patch of it growing on her pillow, close to her face. At that she came to me, as soon as she could get her garments upon her. I was in the gallery at the time, lighting the fire for breakfast. "Come here, John," she said, and led me aft. When I saw the thing upon her pillow I shuddered, and then and there we agreed to go right out of the ship, and see whether we could not fare to make ourselves more comfortable ashore. Hurriedly we gathered together a few of our belongings, and even among these I found that the fungus had been at work, for one of her shawls had a little lump of it growing near one edge. I threw the whole thing over the side without saying anything to her. The raft was still alongside, but it was too clumsy to guide, and I lowered down a small boat that hung across the stern, and in this we made our way to the shore. Yet, as we drew near to it, I became gradually aware that here the vile fungus, which had driven us from the ship, was growing riot. In places it rose into horrible, fantastic mounds, which seemed almost to quiver, as with a quiet life, when the wind blew across them. Here and there it took on the forms of vast fingers, and in others it just spread out flat and smooth and treacherous. Odd places, it appeared as grotesque stunted trees, seeming extraordinarily kinked and gnarled, the whole quaking vilely at times. At first, it seemed to us that there was no single portion of the surrounding shore which was not hidden beneath the masses of the hideous lichen. Yet, in this, I found we were mistaken, for somewhat later, coasting along the shore at a little distance, we described a smooth white patch of what appeared to be fine sand, and there we landed. It was not sand. What it was I do not know. All that I have observed is that upon it the fungus will not grow, while everywhere else, save where the sand-like earth wanders oddly, pathwise, amid the grey desolation of the lichen, there is nothing but that loathsome greyness. It is difficult to make you understand how cheered we were to find one place that was absolutely free from the growth, and here we deposited our belongings. Then we went back to the ship for such things as it seemed to us we should need. Among other matters, I managed to bring ashore with me one of the ship's sails, with which I constructed 2 small tents, which, though exceedingly rough-shaped, served the purposes for which they were intended. In these we lived and stored our various necessities, and thus for a matter of some 4 weeks, all went smoothly, and without particular unhappiness. Indeed, I may say with much happiness, for we were together. It was on the thumb of her right hand that the growth first showed. It was only a small circular spot, much like a little grey mole. My God, how the fear leaped to my heart when she showed me the place. We cleansed it between us, washing it with carbolic and water. In the morning of the following day, she showed her hand to me again. The grey warty thing had returned. For a little while, we looked at one another in silence. Then, still wordless, we started again to remove it. In the midst of the operation, she spoke suddenly. "What's that on the side of your face, dear?" Her voice was sharp with anxiety. I put my hand up to feel. "There, under the hair by your ear, a little to the front of it." My finger rested upon the place, and then I knew. "Let us get your thumb done first," I said, and she submitted, only because she was afraid to touch me until it was cleansed. I finished washing and disinfecting her thumb, and then she turned to my face. After it was finished, we sat together and talked a while of many things, for there had come into our lives sudden, very terrible thoughts. We were all at once afraid of something worse than death. We spoke of loading the boat with provisions and water, and making our way out onto the sea. Yet we were helpless, for many causes, and the growth had attacked us already. We decided to stay. God would do with us what was His will. We would wait. A month, 2 months, 3 months passed, and the places grew somewhat, and there had come others. Yet we fought so strenuously with the fear that its headway was but slow, comparatively speaking. Occasionally we ventured off to the ship for such stores as we needed. There we found that the fungus grew persistently. One of the nodules on the main deck soon became as high as my head. We had now given up all hope or thought of leaving the island. We had realized that it would be unallowable to go among healthy humans with the things from which we were suffering. With this determination and knowledge in our minds, we knew that we should have to husband our food and water, for we did not know, at that time, but that we should possibly live for many years. This reminds me that I have told you that I am an old man. Judged by years, this is not so, but... He broke off, then continued somewhat abruptly. As I was saying, we knew that we should have to use care in the matter of food, but we had no idea then how little food there was left of which to take care. It was a week later that I made the discovery that all the other bread tanks, which I had supposed full, were empty, and that beyond the odd tins of vegetables and meat and some other matters, we had nothing on which to depend, but the bread in the tank which I had already opened. After learning this, I bestirred myself to do what I could, and to set to work at fishing in the lagoon, but with no success. At this, I was somewhat inclined to feel desperate, until the thought came to me to try outside the lagoon, in the open sea. Here at times I caught odd fish, but so infrequently that they proved of but little help in keeping us from the hunger which threatened. It seemed to me that our deaths were likely to come by hunger, and not by the growth of the thing which had seized upon our bodies. We were in this terrible state of mind when the 4th month wore out. Then I made a very horrible discovery. One morning, a little before midday, I came off from the ship with a portion of the biscuits which were left. In the mouth of her tent, I saw my sweetheart sitting, eating something. "What is it, my dear?" I called out as I leapt ashore. Yet on hearing my voice, she seemed confused, and turning, slyly threw something toward the edge of the little clearing. It fell short, and a vague suspicion having arisen within me, I walked across and picked it up. It was a piece of the grey fungus. As I went to her with it in my hand, she turned a deadly pale, then rose red. I felt strangely dazed and frightened. my dear," I said, and could say no more. Yet at my words she broke down and cried bitterly. Gradually, as she calmed, I got from her the news that she had tried it the preceding day and liked it. I got her to promise on her knees not to touch it again, however great our hunger. After she had promised, she told me that the desire for it had come suddenly, and that until the next moment of desire, she had experienced nothing toward it but the most extreme repulsion. Later in the day, feeling strangely restless and much shaken with the thing which I had discovered, I made my way along one of the twisted paths formed by a white, sand-like substance, which led among the fungoid growth. I had, once before, ventured along there, but not to any great distance. This time, being completely involved in thought, I went much further than I had hitherto. Suddenly I was called to myself by a queer hoarse sound on my left. Turning quickly, I saw that there was movement among an extraordinarily shaped mass of fungus close to my elbow. It was swaying uneasily, as though it possessed life of its own. Abruptly as I stared, the thought came to me that the thing had a grotesque resemblance to the figure of a distorted human creature. Even as the fancy flashed into my brain, there was a slight, sickening noise of tearing, and I saw that one of the branch-like arms was detaching itself from the surrounding grey masses and coming toward me. The head of the thing, a shapeless grey ball, inclined in my direction. I stood stupidly, and the vile arm brushed across my face. I gave out a frightened cry and ran back a few paces. There was a sweetish taste upon my lips where the thing had touched me. I licked them and immediately was filled with an inhuman desire. I turned and seized a mass of the fungus, then more and more. I was insatiable. In the midst of devouring, the remembrance of the morning's discovery swept into my mazed brain. It was sent by God. I dashed the fragment I held to the ground. Then, utterly wretched, and feeling a dreadful guiltiness, I made my way back to the little encampment. I think she knew, by some marvellous intuition which love must have given, so soon as she set eyes on me. Her quiet sympathy made it easier for me, and I told her of my sudden weakness, yet omitted to mention the extraordinary thing that had gone before. I desired to spare her all unnecessary terror. But for myself, I had added an intolerable knowledge, to breed an incessant terror in my brain, for I doubted not but that I had seen the end of one of these men who had come to the island in the ship on the lagoon. In that monstrous ending, I had seen our own. Thereafter, we kept from the abominable food, though the desire for it had entered into our blood. Yet our drear punishment was upon us, for day by day, with monstrous rapidity, the fungoid growth took hold of our poor bodies. Nothing we could do would check it materially, and so, we who had been human became... well, it matters less each day, only we had been a man and a maid. And day by day the fight was more dreadful, to withstand the hunger lust for the terrible lichen. A week ago, we ate the last of the biscuit, and since that time I have caught 3 fish. I was out here fishing tonight, when your schooner drifted upon me out of the mist. I hailed you, you know the rest, and may God, out of his great heart, bless you for your goodness to a couple of poor outcast souls. There was the dip of an oar, another, then the voice came again, and for the last time, sounding through the slight surrounding mist, ghostly and mournful. God bless you! Goodbye! Goodbye! We shouted together hoarsely, our hearts full of many emotions. I glanced about me. I became aware that the dawn was upon us. The sun flung a stray beam across the hidden sea, pierced the mist dully, and lit up the receding boat with a gloomy fire. Indistinctly I saw something nodding between the oars. I thought of a sponge, a great grey nodding sponge. The oars continued to ply. They were grey, as was the boat, and my eyes searched a moment vainly for the conjunction of hand and oar. My gaze flashed back to the head. It nodded forward as the oars went backward for the stroke. Then the oars dipped, and the boat shot out of the patch of light, and the thing went nodding into the mist. We are 130 days out from Melbourne, and for 3 weeks we have lain in this sweltering calm. It is midnight, and our watch on deck until 4 a.m. I go out and sit on the hatch. A minute later, Jokey, our youngest apprentice, joins me for a chatter. Many are the hours we have sat thus and talked in the night watches, though to be sure it is Jokey who does the talking. I am content to smoke and listen, giving an occasional grunt
at seasons to show that I am attentive. Jokey has been silent for some time, his head bent in meditation. Suddenly he looks up, evidently with the intention of making some remark. As he does so, I see his face stiffen with a nameless horror. He crouches back, his eyes staring past me at some unseen fear. Then his mouth opens. He gives forth a strangulated cry and topples backward off the hatch, striking his head against the deck. Fearing I know not what, I turn to look. Great heavens! Rising above the bulwarks, seen plainly in the bright moonlight, is a vast slobbering mouth, a fathom across. From the huge dripping lips hang great tentacles. As I look, the thing comes further over the rail. It is rising, higher and higher. There are no eyes visible, only that fearful slobbering mouth set on the tremendous trunk-like neck, which, even as I watch, is curling inboard with the stealthy celerity of an enormous eel. Over it comes vast, heaving folds. Will it never end? The ship gives a slow, sullen roll to starboard as she feels the weight. Then the tail, a broad, flat-shaped mass, slips over the teak rail and falls with a loud slump on the deck. For a few seconds, the hideous creature lies heaped in writhing, slimy coils. Then, with quick, darting movements, the monstrous head travels along the deck. Close to the mainmast stand the harness casks, and alongside of these a freshly opened cask of salt beef with the top loosely replaced. The smell of the meat seems to attract the monster, and I can hear it sniffing with vast indrawing breath. Then those lips open, displaying 4 huge fangs. There is a quick forward motion of the head, a sudden crashing, crunching sound, and the beef and barrel have disappeared. The noise brings one of the ordinary seamen out of the forecastle. Coming into the night, he can see nothing for a moment. Then, as he gets further aft, he sees, and with horrified cries rushes forward. But too late. From the mouth of the thing there flashes forth a long, broad blade of glistening white, set with fierce teeth. I avert my eyes, but cannot shut out the sickening glut that follows. The man on the lookout, attracted by the disturbance, has witnessed the tragedy, and flies for refuge into the forecastle, flinging to the heavy iron door after him. The carpenter and sailmaker come running out from the half-deck in their drawers. Seeing the awful thing, they rush aft to the cabin with shouts of fear. The second mate, after one glance over the break of the poop, runs down the companionway with the helmsman after him. I can hear them barring the scuttle, and abruptly I realise that I am on the main deck alone. So far, I have forgotten my own danger. The past few minutes seem like a portion of an awful dream. Now, however, I comprehend my position, and shaking off the horror that has held me, turn to seek safety. As I do so, my eyes fall upon Jokey, lying huddled and senseless with fright where he has fallen. I cannot leave him there. Close by stands the empty half-deck, a little steel-built house with iron doors. The lee one is hooked open. Once inside, I am safe. Up to the present, the thing has seemed to be unconscious of my presence. Now, however, The huge barrel-like head sways in my direction. Then comes a muffled bellow, and the great tongue flickers in and out as the brute turns and swirls aft to meet me. I know there is not a moment to lose, and picking up the helpless lad, I make a run for the open door. It is only distant a few yards, but that awful shape is coming down the deck to me in great wreathing coils. I reach the house and tumble in with my burden, then out on deck again to unhook and close the door. Even as I do, something white curls around the end of the house. With a bound I am inside, and the door is shut and bolted. Through the thick glass of the ports, I see the thing sweep round the house, in vain search for me. Jokey has not moved yet, so kneeling down, I loosen his shirt collar and sprinkle some water from the beaker over his face. While I am doing this, I hear Morgan shout something. Then comes a great shriek of terror, and again that sickening sound, glut glut. Jerky stirs uneasily, and rubs his eyes, and sits up suddenly. Was that Morgan shouting? He breaks off with a cry. Where are we? I had such awful dreams. At this moment, there is a sound of running footsteps on the deck, and I hear Morgan's voice at the door. Tom! Open! He stops abruptly, and gives an awful cry of despair. Then I hear him rush forward. Through the porthole I see him spring into the fore-rigging and scramble madly aloft. Something steals up after him. It shows white in the moonlight. It wraps itself around his right ankle. Morgan stops dead, plucks out his sheath knife, and hacks fiercely at the fiendish thing. It lets go, and in a second he is over the top, and running for dear life up the gallant rigging. A time of quietness follows, and presently I see that the day is breaking. Not a sound can be heard, save the heavy gasping breathing of the thing. As the sun rises higher, the creature stretches itself out along the deck, and seems to enjoy the warmth. Still no sound, either from the men forward or the officers aft. I can only suppose that they are afraid of attracting its attention. Yet, a little later, I hear the report of a pistol away aft, and looking out, I see the serpent raise its huge head, as though listening. As it does so, I get a good view of the forepart, and in the daylight, see what the night has hidden. There, right about the mouth, is a pair of little pig eyes that seem to twinkle with a diabolical intelligence. It is swaying its head slowly from side to side. Then, without warning, it turns quickly and looks right in through the port. I dodge out of sight, but not soon enough. It has seen me, and brings its great mouth up against the glass. I hold my breath. My God, if it breaks the glass... I cower, horrified. From the direction of the port, there comes a loud, harsh, scraping sound. I shiver. Then I remember that there are little iron doors to shut over the ports in bad weather. Without a moment's waste of time, I rise to my feet and slam to the door over the port. Then I go round to the others and do the same. We are now in darkness, and I tell Jokey in a whisper to light the lamp, which after some fumbling he does. About an hour before midnight I fall asleep. I am awakened suddenly some hours later by a scream of agony and the rattle of a water dipper. There is a slight scuffling sound, then that soul-revolting glut glut. I guess what has happened. One of the men forward has slipped out of the forecastle to try and get a little water. Evidently, he has trusted to the darkness to hide his movements, the poor beggar. He has paid for his attempt with his life. After this I cannot sleep, though the rest of the night passes quietly enough. Towards morning I doze a bit, but wake every few minutes with a start. Jokey is sleeping peacefully. Indeed, he seems worn out with the terrible strain of the past 24 hours. About 8 AM I call him, and we make a light breakfast off the ship's dry biscuits and water. Of the latter, happily we have a good supply. Jokey seems more himself, and starts to talk a little, possibly somewhat louder than is safe, for as he chatters on, wondering how it will end, there comes a tremendous blow against the side of the house, making it ring again. After this, Jokey is very silent. As we sit there, I cannot but wonder what all the rest are doing, and how the poor beggars forward are faring, cooped up without water, as the tragedy of the night has proved. Towards noon I hear a loud bang, followed by a terrific bellowing. Then comes a great smashing of woodwork, and the cries of men in pain. Vainly I ask myself what has happened. I begin to reason. By the sound of a report, it was evidently something much heavier than a rifle or a pistol, judging from the mad roaring of the thing. The shot must have done some execution. On thinking it further, I became convinced that, by some means, those aft have got hold of the small signal cannon we carry, and though I know that some have been hurt, perhaps killed, yet a feeling of exultation seizes me as I listen to the roars of the thing, and realise that it is badly wounded, perhaps mortally. After a while, however, the bellowing dies away, and only an occasional roar, denoting more of anger than anything else, is heard. Presently, I become aware, by the ship's canting over to starboard, that the creature has gone over to that side, and a great hope springs up within me that possibly it has had enough of us and is going over the rail into the sea. For a time all is silent, and my hope grows stronger. I lean across and nudge Jokey, who is sleeping with his head on the table. He starts up sharply with a loud cry. "Hush!" I whisper hoarsely. "I'm not certain, but I do believe it's gone." Jokey's face brightens wonderfully, and he questions me eagerly. We wait another hour or so, with hope ever rising. Our confidence is returning fast. Not a sound can we hear, not even the breathing of the beast. I get out some biscuits, and Jokey, after rummaging in the locker, produces a small piece of pork and a bottle of ship's vinegar. We fall to with a relish. After our long abstinence from food, the meal acts on us like wine, and what must Jokey do but insist on opening the door to make sure the thing has gone? This I will not allow, telling him that at least it will be safer to open the iron port covers first and have a look out. Jokey argues, but I am immovable. He becomes excited. I believe the youngster is light-headed. Then, as I turn to unscrew one of the after covers, Jokey makes a dash for the door. Before he can undo the bolts, I have him, and after a short struggle lead him back to the table. Even as I endeavour to quieten him, there comes at the starboard door, the door that Jokey has tried to open, a sharp, loud sniff, sniff, followed immediately by a thunderous grunting howl, and a foul stench of putrid breath sweeps in under the door. A great trembling takes me, and were it not for the carpenter's tool chest, I should fall. Jokey turns very white, and is violently sick, after which he is seized by a hopeless fit of sobbing. Hour after hour passes, and weary to death, I lie down on the chest upon which I have been sitting, and try to rest. It must have been 2:30 in the morning, after a somewhat longer doze, that I am suddenly awakened by a most tremendous uproar away forward. Men's voices shrieking, cursing, praying, but in spite of the terror expressed, so weak and feeble, while in the midst, and at times broken off short, with that hellishly suggestive glut glut, is the unearthly bellowing of the thing. Fear incarnate seizes me, and I can only fall on my knees and pray. Too well I know what is happening. Jokey has slept through it all, and I am thankful. Presently, under the door there steals a narrow ribbon of light, and I know that the day has broken on the second morning of our imprisonment. I let Jokey sleep on. I will let him have peace while he may. Time passes, but I take little notice. The thing is quiet, probably sleeping. About midday, I eat a little biscuit and drink some of the water. Jokey still sleeps. It is best so. A sound breaks the stillness. The ship gives a slight heave, and I know that once more the thing is awake. Round the deck it moves, causing the ship to roll perceptibly. Once it goes forward, I fancy to again explore the forecastle. Evidently, it finds nothing, for it returns almost immediately. It pauses a moment at the house, then goes on further aft. Up aloft, somewhere in the forerigging, there rings out a peal of wild laughter, though sounding very faint and far away. The horror stops suddenly. I listen intently, but hear nothing save a sharp creaking beyond the after end of the house, as though a strain had come upon the rigging. A minute later, I hear a cry aloft, followed almost instantly by a loud crash on deck that seems to shake the ship. I wait in anxious fear. What is happening? The minutes pass slowly. Then comes another frightened shout. It ceases suddenly. The suspense has become terrible, and I am no longer able to bear it. Very cautiously, I open one of the afterport covers, and peep out to see a fearful sight. There, with its tail up on the deck, and its vast body curled around the main mast, is the monster. Its head above the topsail yard, and its great, claw-armed tentacle waving in the air. It is the first proper sight that I have had of the thing. Good heavens! It must weigh 100 tons. Knowing that I shall have time, I open the port itself, then crane my head out and look up. There, on the extreme end of the lower topsail yard, I see one of the able seamen. Even down here, I note the staring horror of his face. At this moment, he sees me, and gives a weak, hoarse cry for help. I can do nothing for him. As I look, the great tongue shoots out and licks him off the yard, much as might a dog a fly off the window pane. Higher still, but happily out of reach, are two more of the men. As far as I can judge, they are lashed to the mast above the royal yard. The thing attempts to reach them, but after a futile effort it ceases and starts to slide down, coil on coil, to the deck. While doing this, I notice a great gaping wound on its body, some 20 feet above the tail. I drop my gaze from aloft and look aft. The cabin door is torn from its hinges, and the bulkhead, which, unlike the half-deck, is of teak wood, is partly broken down. With a shudder, I realise the cause of those cries after the cannon shot. Turning, I screw my head round and try to see the foremast, but cannot. The sun, I notice, is low, and the night is near. Then I draw in my head and fasten up both port and cover. How will it end? Oh, how will it end? After a while, Jokey wakes up. He is very restless, yet though he has eaten nothing during the day, I cannot get him to touch anything. Night draws on. We are too weary, too dispirited to talk. I lie down, but not to sleep. Time passes. A ventilator rattles violently somewhere on the main deck, and there sounds constantly that slurring, gritty noise. Later, I hear a cat's agonized howl, and then again all is quiet. Some time after comes a great splash alongside. Then, for some hours, all is as silent as the grave. Occasionally I sit up on the chest and listen, yet never a whisper of noise comes to me. There is an absolute silence. Even the monotonous creak of the gear has died away entirely, and at last a real hope is springing up within me. That splash, this silence, surely I am justified in hoping. I do not wake Jokey this time. I will prove first for myself that all is safe. Still I wait. I will run no unnecessary risks. After a time I creep to the afterport and will listen, but there is no sound. I put up my hand and feel at the screw, then again I hesitate, yet not for long. Noiselessly, I begin to unscrew the fastening of the heavy shield. It swings loose on its hinge, and I pull it back and peer out. My heart is beating madly. Everything seems strangely dark outside. Perhaps the moon has gone behind a cloud. Suddenly, a beam of moonlight enters through the port and goes as quickly. I stare out. Something moves. Again the light streams in, and now I seem to be looking into a great cavern, at the bottom of which quivers and curls something palely white. My heart seems to stand still. It is the horror. I start back and seize the iron port flap to slam it to. As I do so, something strikes the glass like a steam ram, shatters it to atoms, and flicks past me into the berth. I scream and spring away. The port is quite filled with it. The lamp shows it dimly. It is curling and twisting here and there. It is as thick as a tree, and covered with a smooth, slimy skin. At the end is a great claw like a lobster's, only 1,000 times larger. I cower down in the farthest corner. It has broken the tool chest to pieces with one click of those frightful mandibles. Jokey has crawled under a bunk. The thing sweeps round in my direction. I feel a drop of sweat trickle slowly down my face. It tastes salty. Nearer comes that awful death. Crash! I roll over backwards. It has crushed the water breaker against which I leant, and I am rolling in the water across the floor. The claw drives up, then down, with a quick, uncertain movement, striking the deck a dull, heavy blow, a foot from my head. Jokey gives a little gasp of horror. Slowly the thing rises, and starts feeling its way around the berth. It plunges into a bunk, and pulls out a bolster, nips it in half and drops it, then moves on. It is feeling along the deck. As it does so, it comes across a half of a bolster. It seems to toy with it, then picks it up and takes it out through the port. A wave of putrid air fills the berth. There is a grating sound, and something enters the port again. Something white and tapering and set with teeth. Hither and thither it curls, rasping over the bunk's ceiling and deck, with a noise like that of a great saw at work. Twice it flickers above my head, and I close my eyes. Then off it goes again. It sounds now on the opposite side of the berth and nearer to Jokey. Suddenly, the harsh, raspy noise becomes muffled, as though the teeth were passing across some soft substance. Jokey gives a horrid little scream that breaks off into a bubbling, whistling sound. I open my eyes. The tip of the vast tongue is curled tightly round something that drips, then is quickly withdrawn, allowing the moonbeams to steal in again through the berth. I rise to my feet. Looking around, I note, in a mechanical sort of way, the wrecked state of the berth, the shattered chests, the dismantled bunks, and something else. "Jokey!" I cry and tingle all over. There is that awful thing again at the port. I glance around for a weapon. I will revenge Jokey. Ah, there. Right under the lamp, where the wreck of the carpenter's chest strews the floor, lies a small hatchet. I spring forward and seize it. It is small, but so keen, so keen. I feel its razor edge lovingly. Then I am back at the port. I stand to one side and raise my weapon. The great tongue is feeling its way to those fearsome remains. It reaches them. As it does so, with a scream of "Jokey! Jokey!" I strike savagely again, and again, and again, gasping as I strike. Once more, and the monstrous mass falls to the deck, writhing like a hideous eel. A vast, warm flood rushes in through the porthole. There is a sound of breaking steel and an enormous bellowing. A singing comes in my ears and grows louder and louder. Then the berth grows indistinct and suddenly dark.